Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I am honored and pleased to introduce today's speaker, the senior United States Senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown. Senator Brown has been a frequent presenter at the City Club and last appeared here in November 2013. He is an excellent friend to the citadel of free speech. I will add, he's not afraid to take questions and to answer questions, so remember that when we get to the Q&A session, on all sides of the spectrum of political debate. So please remember that. Now I gotta say, as one famous example, he addressed the City Club of Cleveland via Skype from Washington in 2011 as you were attending to important Senate business that day. So again, a real friend of the City Club of Cleveland. This past January, the Senate Finance Committee formed bipartisan tax reform working groups focused on 5 topic areas, one of which was international tax. Senator Brown served on the International Tax Working Group, which was co-chaired by Ohio Senator Rob Portman, who, by the way, presented at the City Club of Cleveland in July 2014, and New York Senator Charles Schumer. The working group released its report on July 7th of this year. The report opens by noting that, quote, from 2013 through September 2014, at least a dozen companies pursued tax inversions, transactions which move a company's corporate tax home outside of the United States, end quote. The report referred to anti-inversion regulations issued in September 2014 by the Treasury Department and stated that, quote, it's clear that the fundamental problem cannot be fixed without reform of our tax system, end quote. Now, more recently, during our very active presidential campaigns, a number of candidates have announced their proposed tax reform plans. Some Republican candidate proposals have included a change from the current worldwide tax system, allowing deferral of taxes on international income until that money comes back or is repatriated to the United States, to instead a territorial tax system. Now, on the global versus territorial structure, I would note that, according to the Tax Foundation, the United States is one of only 6 developed countries that taxes corporations on worldwide income. So maybe we'll hear your perspectives on it. What do you think? Okay. So as I said, we'll hear Senator Brown's perspectives on international tax reform today. And I would be remiss not to do a brief biographical background on a true Ohio guy. A native of Mansfield, Ohio, he received his Bachelor of Arts degree in Russian Studies from Yale University, departure from Ohio, and he earned a Master of Public Administration and Master of Arts in Education degree from the Ohio State University. He began his political career as a member of the Ohio House of Representatives and subsequently served as representative of Ohio's 13th Congressional District until being elected to the United States Senate in November 2006. He is the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. Senator Brown is married to Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Connie Schultz, who's seated here at the head table today. Another outstanding friend of the City Club, I would add, and they live here in Cleveland. So please join me in welcoming back to the City Club of Cleveland, Senator Sherrod Brown.
Makes this comment, I leave the state for 3.5 years, and he's from Iowa or Idaho or one of those states. Is it Idaho? It's Iowa. It's Iowa. Okay. I know people get Iowa and Idaho mixed up, so I don't get them mixed up. He's from Cedar Rapids. Cedar Rapids, Idaho? Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I just had to fair play. I mean, turn around. Anyway, thank you, Paul. Thank you for the work that you've done, especially here, but also on our bipartisan Judicial Selection Committee. Thank you to the servers for serving us today. Progressives always honor hourly wage earners. Thank you for their being here and doing such a good job trying to make their way through tip-between tables and all. I love coming to the City Club. We were talking, Dan and I were talking earlier, and Paul and Connie, that I think my first appearance at the City Club was more than 30 years ago. It's wonderful to be here as a speaker. It's wonderful to be here as a guest. And my last visit to a City Club event was off premises where the crowd was as rewarding as the size of the crowd is today, and it was 3 times that for the chair of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen. Prior to her visit, she had asked me about seeing some other things in Cleveland. I know how much she cares about the real economy. We've never had a Fed chair quite like her. And she and I visited Alcoa, one of Cleveland's iconic manufacturers, and she got to see the 50,000 ton, I believe it's 50,000 ton press at Alcoa. She actually got to operate it, or at least she thought she was operating it. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, each time I'm here, I am always no less in awe of the City Club's history, its importance, what it's meant to this city, what it's meant as a forum for national speakers and speakers in our communities and our neighborhoods. No group I speak to anywhere in the country has, I believe, the level of sophistication. This isn't false, empty flattery. It's really true. No, not to have the level of sophistication that the Cleveland City Club does. I know that all of you care about public affairs. I know that many of you are wondering, since the news broke of Majority Leader McCarthy's decision yesterday, what's going to happen. We pick up our morning papers, and yes, it's Friday. The PD was on our doorstep. It's Friday, right? Friday. It wasn't Thursday. It wasn't. Anyway, but we read, and Connie and I subscribe to 3 papers, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the Plain Dealer. Wall Street Journal labeled the problems in the House of Representatives, used the word turmoil. The Wall Street Journal the New York Times used the word chaos. I take no partisan pleasure in what's happening in Washington. I worry for my country, what happens in the House of Representatives and how we govern with that kind of dysfunction. As an observer of the House and a former member of the House, I've looked at John Boehner and his position over the last 3 or 4 years, and I sort of characterize it as he wakes up every morning, he's got to decide, is he Speaker of the Tea Party or is he Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives? When he's Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, we get things done. When he's Speaker of the Tea Party, they're all fundamentally immobilized. That's what I hope that we can see. I hope they can see their way through, so that we have 2 vibrant parties that are negotiating in good faith with the president and moving this country forward in ways that we can. That, to me, is why the City Club's mission in many ways is more important than it's ever been. Too often in this age of 24-hour news cycles, cable news and political polarization, we retreat to our corners. We rarely hear dissenting views. Pundits repeat our opinions back to us in too many cases. All of us, elected officials and pundits alike, need to get out and listen to what other people say and listen to people with whom we disagree. Abraham Lincoln, in the midst of the Civil War, his staff would admonish him would say, you've got to stay in the White House and win the war and free the slaves and preserve the Union. And Lincoln said, no, I got to go out and get my public opinion baths. We could all learn from that. Pope Francis, in the early days of his papacy, admonished his parish priests to go out and smell like the flock. We could all do that. And as pundits, as elected officials, as people, many of you in this room, that's what you do. You go out and smell like the flock. You go out and you get your public opinion baths. You are better community activists because of it. All of us should do better that way. 4 or 5 years ago, Connie and I were driving to Columbus one day, and we were listening to NPR Science Friday. I know if City Club people listen to NPR Science Friday. I'm sure many of you do. And the subject often is, I can't use that very many places, so thank you. Often they interview somebody about something I don't know a lot about, so it's usually pretty interesting. They're interviewing a guy named Earl Swift, who had wrote a book called The Big Roads, and it was the history of the U.S. interstate system, starting when Roosevelt sort of sketched it out literally on a piece of paper, the interstates going east-west and north-south, when Eisenhower then led the federal government effort to really build the interstates. But it was also sort of, in a way, a story. This book is a story of U.S. infrastructure overall and in what we've done as a country. Our parents left us with a transportation system and public infrastructure that was the envy of the world in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s into the 1980s. In those days, though, they called it something else. They called it public works, roads and bridges and sewer and water systems and medical research and community colleges and the electric grid, all of those things we called public works. Back then, politicians didn't run from the word public. Politicians didn't sign pledges to Washington lobbyists. We recognized that government investment benefits all of us. As I said, our parents bequeathed us this amazing system, this amazing public works infrastructure system, yet we have failed to modernize it. We've failed to build on it. We have not even adequately maintained it. The United States now, as I said, once number one in the world, now ranks 16th in public infrastructure, 16th in the world. A quarter of Ohio's bridges, and we're no worse than other states. We're slightly in some ways, but not mostly about the same. Quarter of Ohio's bridges are structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. Those are the words in the study about it. 45% of our major urban highways are congested, costing drivers billions every year in additional repairs and operating costs. RTA just here has a maintenance and repair backlog of more than $200 million. That doesn't even include the $240 million that they would like to spend, think they need to spend on new rail cars. Rebuilding our infrastructure, doing public works should not be subject to debate. How to do it, perhaps, but not the fact we need to do it. Business leaders agree, labor agrees, everyone who's waited in traffic on I-90 agrees. When Connie and I moved to Cleveland 2 years ago, we immediately saw the toll that potholes on Tierney Road inflicted on our Made in Youngstown Chevy Cruze. That's why although it's a pretty tough car, it can stand it. It's a tough car. That's why every politician pays lip service to doing something about infrastructure. But the current states of our roads and bridges exposes those politicians' conversations and comments as pretty much empty promises. Let me tell you a story. 18 months ago, the United States Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers, two of the most powerful interest groups that represent almost every single business in this country, came to the Democratic caucus. This was maybe March, April 2014. They had four priorities they cared about. The four priorities were immigration, long-term highway/infrastructure bill, paying our debts, not bumping up against the debt ceiling, and reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. As they sat in that room and looked around at the then 55 senators, 54, whatever it was, it's fewer now, as you may know, as they stood in that room and looked around, every single senator in that room, with possibly the exception on a couple of issues of Joe Manchin and Bernie Sanders, but virtually every senator in that room agreed with them, supports EXIM reauthorization, supports a highway bill, supports doing it right on paying our debts, and supports immigration reform. So why wasn't it happening? It wasn't happening because of Tea Party Republicans, both in the Senate, but especially in the House. So Tea Party Republicans that these two groups had helped to elect. So we asked them, okay, you support these four things. The Senate wants, the Democrats want to do them. The Republicans are standing in the way of doing them. Yet you continue to spend millions of dollars. Just a year and a half earlier, they had spent $40 million to beat me, more than any state in any Senate race in the country's history. They were about to spend tens of millions to defeat many of my colleagues, and they were successful in doing that. So I don't expect them, as I was meeting with the CEOs of all the major banks and insurance companies last week. There were 8 or 10 of them sitting around a table. And I said, I don't expect you to become Democrats necessarily or to support people like me, but I do expect that you will use your influence with the people whom you elected to get them to do things like a long-term highway bill and an immigration bill and export-import reauthorization and quit playing games with a debt ceiling. Unfortunately, we have a problem, and the problem is that 49 U.S. senators and 49 sitting U.S. senators, 221 sitting U.S. House members have signed the Grover Norquist pledge that they will never vote for a tax increase, nor will they ever close a tax loophole that might result in more revenue to the federal government. But that's the bad news. The good news is there are still some Republicans, and there are certainly people out there, the country wants us to, who come to realize when the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and organized labor and Democrats agree on something, there is a way to find a deal to be made. And that's what the subject of this conversation today is going to be about. To make that deal, to come to that agreement, I think we turn to the tax code. it used to be we paid for transportation with user fee. That's off the table because of that pledge to Grover Norquist. But reforming the international tax code presents an opportunity to finance the type of infrastructure that our nation needs to stay competitive while bringing tax revenue back to the United States. And let me talk for a while. We all know that our tax code is broken. It creates incentives for large multinational companies to move jobs and profits overseas. It's become the business plan for many, many companies in this country to shut down production in Elyria or to shut down production in North Ridgeville or Cleveland and move it to Wuhan or Beijing and Xi'an and get tax credits, tax breaks, deductions for the move against their federal income tax. We've seen, as a member of the Senate Finance Committee, I've seen targeted Democratic and Republican tax reform efforts stifled due to the hope of future comprehensive tax reform. The chairman of the committee thinks we're going to pass major comprehensive tax reform, so we shouldn't do anything smaller than that. I would like to think that we could pass comprehensive tax reform. I think we can't. That's the reason for this proposal. Beginning more than 2 years ago, I worked with a number of Ohio companies, some manufacturing, some service companies, all kinds of Ohio companies, to develop a proposal for tax reform that would close down overseas tax havens while promoting investment in the U.S. What I discovered was we could do this by focusing on reforming the international system. I submitted that proposal to the then chairman of the Finance Committee, a gentleman named Max Baucus, who has since become ambassador to China. Unfortunately, his effort at comprehensive tax reform fizzled, so like so many efforts before it. But now I think we have a bipartisan step forward. We're beginning to gather momentum. I've been part of a bipartisan group negotiating Senator Schumer from New York, Democrat from New York, Senator Warner, much more conservative Democrat from Virginia, and I are negotiating with Paul Ryan, the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Our international tax code now allows U.S. companies, as I think you know, to use legal schemes to move profits out of the U.S. and into tax havens with very low or literally no corporate tax at all. Places like the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas and the Isle of Man. Companies shift their intellectual property out of the U.S. and into low-tax jurisdictions. They use loans between and among the various subsidiaries of a corporation to hide profits in higher tax jurisdictions. Once these profits are booked out of the United States, out of the geographic United States, they can't be returned to the United States without incurring the effective tax, that company's effective tax rate, sometimes as high as 35%. So companies keep those profits overseas, as we know, untaxed by the U.S., sometimes unused, at least unused for American productive purposes by the companies. American companies have collectively built up, it's reported, about $2 trillion in overseas profits. That's $2,000 billion, $2 trillion. That's $2 trillion not being invested in our economy. It's billions of dollars lost tax revenue that we should be able to have access to. We've tried before to put these tax havens out of business, as Paul said in the introduction. 10 years ago, Congress enacted a temporary repatriation tax holiday saying, bring your profits back. We'll tax it at a very low rate. And that will help our economy. The attempt was to encourage U.S. companies to bring the profits back and make investments. It didn't work. Corporations made windfalls. It cost the government billions. That investment really never made its way to the United States. Instead, the firms largely used this windfall, these profits they brought back. They used their repatriated earnings for the very purpose Congress had tried to prohibit. They used it for large payouts to stockholders, and they used it for stock buybacks. In fact, the nonpartisan Congressional Research Service found that companies that were the biggest beneficiaries, the largest multinationals which were the biggest beneficiaries of that repatriation, that 2004 tax holiday, actually cut jobs in 2005 and 2006. The longer we delay reform, the worse that we'll get. Paul mentioned some of the repatriation we've seen. The cost of inaction, lost investment, lost tax revenues, and leaving our companies vulnerable to foreign competition is simply too great. The challenge is also our opportunity. We have two big policy problems that I think we can solve with one major change. Our need for long-term public spending, public investment, public infrastructure, and our need to fix our international tax system. Here's how it would work. We will convert our old broken international system, and as part of the transition to a new system, levy a one-time tax on the build-up overseas profits of our corporations. We'll use that revenue to pay for infrastructure investment. This new international tax system will be based on what is called a country-by-country global minimum tax. There are a number of ways to design the tax, but the main features are the same. In every country in which a corporation does business, it pays a certain tax rate. If that rate is below our minimum tax, the minimum tax we set, which likely will be in the mid to upper teens, the corporation will get a credit for the tax paid and immediately pay the U.S. difference. In other words, if it's the Cayman Islands where there's no tax, they'd have to pay the whole, whatever number we end up, 18, 19%. If the taxes in a country are 15%, they would only pay 3 or 4% back to the U.S. government. So it effectively should put the tax havens out of business. If a corporation's doing if a corporation's doing business, I'll repeat, in a country with a legitimate economy and a legitimate corporate tax system, the U.S. will tax only the portion of profit attributable to the U.S. headquarters. So there'll be a minor tax, less than 5% there. As I said, tax havens will be put out of business. This is a fusion of proposals that have been put forth by senators and House members in both parties over the last few years. It will move us to a more competitive tax regime. Now, once we agree on a new system, we need to address the $2 trillion in earnings that are now parked overseas in corporations overseas, U.S. companies overseas. The answer is another bipartisan proposal. It's a one-time tax on all of the earnings earned by those foreign multinationals to fund this 6-year infrastructure bill that our country needs. We know that a reasonable tax on locked out overseas funds is enough to pay for a robust transportation system, an increase over what we're doing now, but a reasonable kind of increase. And the one-time tax will help us avoid the mistakes of 2004. When the money was brought back, those companies back then could again begin to outsource jobs and build up reserves overseas. So the one-time tax is not a holiday. It's not a tax holiday. It is not optional. All money overseas will pay that one-time tax. Likely the negotiations will end up in the low teens, 10, 11, 12, 13% for that. I think it represents a rare opportunity for both sides to come together. And with interest rates at historic lows, what's particularly almost criminal to me that we aren't investing in infrastructure now is that interest rates are so low, and local governments, local communities can leverage the dollars they have in ways at low interest rates that can do a lot more building of infrastructure. Think about it, what a deal like this would mean for Cleveland and Ohio's economy. Think about the projects that would finally get off the ground. Projects like fixing Dead Man's Curve in Cleveland. By the way, I think it says all you need to know about the state of our public works when we refer to places as Dead Man's Curve and Collision Bend in the Cuyahoga River. Or in Columbus, the CMAX rapid bus transit system, similar to the Helpline project on Euclid Avenue, connecting employment hubs north of the city with downtown. But federal funding for that was stripped out of the Republican budget. In Cincinnati, the $2.5 billion Brent Spence Bridge crossing the Ohio River into Kentucky. That bridge, believe it or not, carries 4% of GDP every single day. That bridge takes products to and from Cleveland and Columbus and Dayton and Toledo and obviously Detroit and points south. That bridge is 50 years old, more than 50 now, needs to be rebuilt. The Toledo water system is in such bad shape that you all, I think, are aware that last summer, 500,000 Northwest Ohioans lost their drinking water for almost 3 days. So this is more, but it's more than about these individual projects, as important as they are. These investments reach far beyond the operating engineer or the running a crane or driving a bulldozer. It's about steel workers in Mahoning Valley providing beams and girders. It's about the plant workers in a plant I visited in Coshocton making pipe for road and wastewater projects. It's about the heavy machinery dealer in Broadview Heights selling equipment to the contractors working at the Port of Toledo. It's about ensuring that Darke County and southwestern Ohio, that their farmers' grain is shipped to foreign markets. We can reduce the time it takes to move freight from coast to coast. We can cut down on the time airplanes circle waiting to land. We can fix the aging locks on the Ohio River that slow down barge traffic. When we do this, we obviously grow our economy. The reason, in part, that we had a good economy, a growing economy in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, in part was for a lot of reasons. We had a strong union movement that workers were paid well, and workers, when they were productive, they were compensated for it. We also had good, solid infrastructure, building a foundation for economic growth. I'll close with this. Think about the history of our country's economic expansion. Think about President Lincoln in the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. Think about President Roosevelt in rural electric and the building of the modern electric grid. Think of President Eisenhower in the establishment of our highway system. Every one of these was government, public works, government investment that led to great economic growth as business could grow and individuals could do what they needed to do. It's what government does at its best. It makes the big down payments in our future that no private company is supposed to do or really can do, and it creates the conditions necessary for business to grow and thrive. Your skepticism would not be unwarranted about our ability to do this. But I can tell you this, we had a pretty diverse group of people in our working group. We didn't agree on health care. Some in the group wanted to repeal Obamacare. Some of us helped to write it and will continuously and vigorously defend it. Others want to defund Planned Parenthood. Obviously, I don't. A number of them were against the Iran deal. I was for the Iran deal. A number of them on all kinds of hot button issues, we didn't agree. But where we come together on this is we can agree on public works. We can agree on building infrastructure. And that's my hope, my commitment to work towards, and my hope that we can deliver on that. With that, I'll stop and take questions.
You can take a break and sit down.
Oh, that's right. You want to do that for that?
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are very much enjoying a Friday forum featuring United States Senator Sherrod Brown. We'll return to Senator Brown in a moment for our traditional City Club question and answer period, and would ask you to start formulating your questions now and try to keep them short and to the point and actually structured as questions. And today in a packed room, please allow the people holding the mics to kind of navigate their way through the tables. Now, if you are joining us via our radio broadcast or webcast and would like to tweet a question, you can do so at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the radio broadcast and web stream provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream, or one of the many radio stations across the country that carry City Club programs. Production, distribution, and broadcast of City Club programs are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us next Friday, October 16th, as the City Club welcomes 3 members of the Cleveland Community Police Commission to discuss ways to ensure the success of the Cleveland Consent Decree. For more information about our upcoming and past programs, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's forum is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group and the Sisters of Charity Health System. We thank you for your support. Our community partner for today's forum is the Center for Community Solutions. We thank you for your support. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Center for Families and Children, the Cleveland Clinic, Cuyahoga Community College, the Democratic Party of Cuyahoga County, Friends of Sherrod Brown, there are a lot of Friends of Sherrod Brown here today, Retzel and Andrus LPA, and University Hospitals, and we thank you all for your support. And we welcome students from Brecksville Broadview Heights High School and Shaw High School to today's forum. Student participation is made possible by a generous grant from the Loeb Foundation. We thank you for your support, and I'd like the students to stand and be recognized. And I'll remind you, you can ask questions too, and what a rare opportunity to ask a question of a man who knows how things work in Washington. Now, as promised, we're going to return to Senator Brown for a question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone here today, including guests. Holding the microphones today are our City Club Content Associate, Teddy Eisenberg. Teddy's over to my left, and Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky. First question, please.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Two-part question for you. First of all, what advice would you give Chris Antonetti to accomplish in the off-season? And secondly,
Good start.
Secondly, you sort of indicated that you just think the gas tax is just a total non-starter. But I mean, it hasn't been raised in I don't know how many years. It's been the core, and over that time period where the interstate highway system was growing and successful, it was the gas tax that was providing most of the funding for it. Is there any chance, especially while gasoline tax prices are actually relatively low right now, that we could come back in and actually try and find a way to at least get a modest increase in the gas tax?
Thank you. On the first part of the question, I would try to get Dick Pogue to leverage his family fortune to sign a really good free agent. That would be the first thing I'd do. He's smiling. He hasn't rejected the thought yet. They have best starting pitching maybe in baseball next year, so you build from that. I don't know. I mean, that's what's discouraging sometimes. I'm never really discouraged, but that's what's sometimes distressing on where we go with this. In the past, we have been able to pass a long-term transportation bill. We haven't passed one in several years now, but we were able to do a long-term transportation bill funded by a user fee. It's the way our country decided to do it many years ago in the 50s when it was controversial at the time, but they figured out that was the best way to do it. The gas tax is different in the sense that it's not been raised since 1993. It doesn't reflect the growth. I mean, we'll put it this way: cars now get much better mileage. It's a tax per gallon, not a tax, not a percentage of the cost of anything. So because people get better mileage, as prices go up to pave roads and rebuild highways and bridges, it clearly doesn't keep up, and people get 10 miles per gallon better than they used to. So all of that's a concern. I think there are a variety of ways of doing it. I generally support a user fee of some kind. I just don't know if you can if it comes back to what I said about that story with the manufacturers and in the chamber coming to the Democratic caucus. If they would use their influence with people whom they helped elect, and many tens of millions of dollars that they've spent to either unelect some of us or to elect others of us, if they would use their influence with those people that they helped elect to actually bite the bullet, do what they have to do to come up with revenues to fund our transportation system, it's the most logical way. Our proposal that I mentioned today, I think would work splendidly well, with one exception. It would fund the bringing back of the $2 trillion, so it would fund enough to do robust next 6 years, but it wouldn't fund beyond that. So while I want to look at it longer term, I think if we can solve this now for those 6 years, politics change, the country changes, perhaps we could go back to some kind of user fee that way. But we're not going to give up. It's the way that Senator McConnell did when he tried to fund this most recent transportation bill. It was a 6-year bill. It only had 3 years of funding. It was some funny money. It was a fee on banks that had nothing to do on bank investments, which have nothing to do with transportation. It was a fee on home purchases, which have nothing to do with transportation. It was some other kinds of moving money around, and it had no sort of had not the kind of gravitas around it that it should on something of this magnitude. That's why he couldn't get it through. And I'm not sure the House would have the House would do it anyway at that point. So.
Hi. After the recent mass shootings in Oregon last week, what are you going to do to ensure better safety for colleges over Ohio?
Thank you for bringing that up. I supported what was a bipartisan effort a couple of years ago. I believe it was after the Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut, where we had some momentum for criminal background checks. That should be the minimum we do. I get enough from the NRA every election, and I will continue to. But I also know that unfortunately most members of Congress get A's from the NRA, and from the gun lobby, and that makes this more difficult. There was a shooting again last night in Arizona, in the middle of the night at a fraternity house. 4 people were shot. One died so far. The number of shootings. So somebody pointed out that when somebody unsuccessfully tried to bring explosive shoes onto an airplane, we now make all of America, or at least most of America, take their shoes off when they go through airports. Yet we have a school shooting at least monthly. Some you barely make the national news, and we do very little or nothing. I found an interesting article. I can't remember who wrote it. A couple of days ago about making this in part the gun manufacturers, that they you hear the comparison. We license cars and we do driver's licenses, and the much more rigorous than the way we sell guns. We have the Consumer Product Safety Commission involved in all kinds of different regulations on safety issues. We don't do it with the gun manufacturers, and the gun manufacturers fund so much of what the NRA does. And I think that's a place we should look. I don't know exactly how to do it, but that's something that we absolutely should consider too. But thank you for bringing that up.
If we can get everyone to work together on that one thing you were talking about, do you think that might ease open the floodgates a little bit, and we'll see more working together on things like immigration reform and the other points that the Chamber of Commerce and the national manufacturers wanted?
I'm hopeful. I think that's sort of the intent. We've had moments of success, bipartisan success on things. One of the things that we did last year, when I do anything in the Senate, when I see an issue or hear a problem from somebody, I always go to a Republican senator to work something out. There was a piece in Politico the other day about, I sit across the table at the Veterans Committee with a very, very conservative Republican from North Carolina. The story was about how we've collaborated on a number of veterans issues that have a very good chance of becoming law. So you always, or on our hubs bill last year, manufacturing bill, a couple of years ago, it was a presidential initiative that we had begun and found a Republican from Missouri, and he and I shepherded it through. This tells you how dysfunctional in some ways the House was. We had to ask the White House to talk less about it because we knew that every time they talked about it, it would run into more of a roadblock in the House. And the White House cooperated, and then we did the bill signing, or he did the bill signing. And anyway, so, some of it's that, but I'm always hopeful. We were talking before the program, Paul and Dan and Connie and I, about when you get discouraged and you look at the dysfunction, or you look at the chaos now in the House, or the fact that Mitch McConnell, sort of like Harry Reid, couldn't get 60 votes on very many things, and you think sort of, woe is us, what's wrong with our country? This is not even close to the worst time in our country's history. Not even close. And it's just always good to remember that we will find a way, as we do as a country. Maybe it's a little bit of the Churchill, democracy's the best system, worst system in the world except for all the others. Maybe we have to fail at everything first sometimes on these, but I'm hopeful we'll get better.
Yes, I have a question also about gun violence. I think most people don't realize that the Second Amendment was put in the Constitution because the southern states wanted to be able to arm slave patrols and muster the militia to put down slave rebellions. And after Sandy Hook, the Plain Dealer called, actually in an editorial, for a review, to either rewrite or repeal what they said was a dangerous anachronism, the Second Amendment. Would you be for that?
I can't imagine it would get to that. I always do what the Plain Dealer editorials suggest. That's right. As Rick, as you do, I know. I know you're all. I've never heard you quote a Plain Dealer editorial before. Even what do they say? Even I've done enough. I can't say anymore about my wife's former employer. I was going to. Okay, I resist. Something about a monkey at a typewriter eventually gets a word, but not to imply anything about anything else. Sorry. Sorry. I don't know. That is so far afield from ever happening. I don't dispute the Second Amendment. I just think that the Second Amendment allows us to do a lot of things for gun safety. It will stand. I mean, we're not going to repeal any of the 10 amendments. I would not want to repeal the other amendments, and that one I just don't think it's the answer. The answer is how we do real gun safety rules better than we have. And I think, as I said to her, that part of it is background checks, part of it is what we do with gun manufacturers themselves.
Senator, if bipartisan tax reform that you described were to pass in Congress, could its implementation be impeded by any of the trade deals like CAFTA or if the TPP passes?
Good question. Thanks, Maria. I don't think so. I think on these issues, they would not. She raises an interesting question. I will talk real briefly about this. One of the victories in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I oppose, but I was sort of led the charge to strip what's called the investor state provisions for tobacco out of the agreement, and the administration standing up to tobacco states and tobacco senators, conservative tobacco senators like Mitch McConnell, did the right thing on this. It looks like we haven't seen the language we think. So let me, just because it's interesting, let me paint the picture really quickly. Trade agreements, in most recent memory, trade agreements allow companies in one country to sue governments in another country. It used to be you had to convince your government to bring a trade action against another government. Now your company can sue a government in another country. And what was happening is that Big Tobacco was suing or threatening to sue under CAFTA, small countries in Latin America who were had passed or were about to pass tobacco safety, for instance. So if Guatemala or Honduras decided that they wanted to pass a strong public health, keep tobacco out of the hands of kids law, Philip Morris could go to court under CAFTA and sue them or threaten to sue them in these countries. And this has actually happened. These countries are so poor and so small that they just decided to just give up on passing the law because they couldn't afford the lawsuit against a major American tobacco company. So that's the bad news. The good news is the administration, while TPP's got serious problems in my mind, the administration did the right thing on tobacco. That's a huge victory. And it was because I organized a number of my colleagues who were for TPP to work on the administration to say, you may lose our votes on TPP if you don't fix tobacco, sort of counteracting the other side who was threatening the opposite there.
Hi, my name is Tyler Woody. I'm in the 11th grade from Shaw High School.
Right.
And my question is, a lot of what you are saying today is similar to what many of me and my classmates were discussing, why Mr. John D. Rockefeller left Cleveland and found out that it is due to people figuring out to tax his businesses instead of appreciating his philanthropy. My question would be, how do you think Rockefeller leaving Cleveland had an impact on the city, both short-term and long?
Well, that would take a student from the sophistication of Shaw High School and some of you living in the old Rockefeller neighborhood, perhaps, too. So I've heard that issue debated. I don't really have a good understanding of that. I think I have no idea why. I mean, there was a story I read years ago that that somehow Rockefeller's money was going to I don't know if his case originally ended up going to the University of Chicago, or he wanted to start a school here, and the city fathers, I guess it was only fathers in those days, didn't treat him right. I have no idea I just know, I know his great-grandson in the U.S. Senate. He was a great fighter for Medicaid and poor kids. John D., I wish I knew more about why he made that decision to leave. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, stump. I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. But if you give me your name, I'm going to find a better answer than that.
Senator, after that question, I have an easy one. You've referred a couple of times in your talk today to the dysfunction in the House. Do you think it might make sense to consider increasing the number of members of the House of Representatives? There's nothing constitutional about the number of House members. That would result in fewer safe districts and less individual interests, particularly conservative ones, ruling districts and sending members to Congress who do not appear to have the national interest at heart.
Good question. It's also not. It's not a requirement that the Speaker of the House has to be a member of the House. So any one of you could be Speaker of the House, and you have as much chance of putting together 218 votes as most of the rest of them do, presumably. I don't know, Tom, that would. I don't know that enlarging the House would affect the sort of ratios in the House, because each state that would grow. Ohio once had as many as, I believe, 24 House members, and now we're down to 16, as you know. The big state gains, Texas, Florida, California's gains have been minimal in the last couple censuses. But I think the better answer is better redistricting. I mean, I just don't see any chance that Congress will enlarge. I think the public wouldn't like that. They think there's already too many of us on the public, whatever. But I think that there is. I mean, Chairman David Pepper's here from the state Democratic chair. They've endorsed recently what's become the bipartisan reapportionment. It's not redistricting of congressional. It's correct. It's only reapportionment of state legislative districts. I think that's a step forward. So I just think, and to show how good the Republicans, how well they did redistricting from their viewpoint, is that 16 districts in Ohio, it's 12 Republicans, 4 Democrats, even though I carried the state by 6 points in the 12 election, and Barack Obama carried it by 3 points. But get this, so the president won Ohio by 166,000, I think, votes. Of the 16 districts, he only won 4 of them. So he lost the 12. He won the 4 districts by 166,000 more than he lost the 12 districts by. I mean, that is precision redistricting that gets, you can't do it much better than that. So I just think the country's got to get serious about redistricting, because you have, some years ago, I did this calculation just sort of back of an envelope about half a decade ago. Ohio, or the 43% in those days of the Republican caucus in the Congress was in the old Confederacy. So you can think about what drives this conservative politics. It's Texas, it's northern Florida, it's Alabama, it's Mississippi, where you only. Barney Frank once said that when he was still in Congress, said half the Republican caucus thinks like Michelle Bachmann, the other half are afraid of a primary from somebody that thinks like Michelle Bachmann. And fundamentally, that's what redistricting has wrought us.
Senator Brown.
Rick, how are you?
Hi. Well, we were treated on Tuesday to a wonderful presentation by Senator Richard Lugar, former senator, at the Council of World Affairs, one of our great sister organizations. And he talked about the rising intensity of the partisanship in D.C., and when asked about its roots, gave a complex answer, but one of his most interesting points was that we need to have perhaps a new primary structure, which I believe is being experimented with in California, where the primary is a general one where Republicans and Democrats and other parties can run in the primary, and then the general election is between the 2 top vote getters, which has the effect of pitting everybody against everybody for a general primary. And that struck me as something I've heard of before, but could have real power to reshape the entire political process, state by state, I guess. But do you have some sense of whether that holds some appeal?
That's a good question. And Shar and Dick Lugar are friends of Connie's and mine, and he's a terrific elected official. And he lost from, really he ended up losing because of the rightward sprint. I was going to say drift, but more rightward sprint of the Indiana Republican Party. And then they lost the seat, as you may remember, too. The Republicans lost the seat. So I know about California. I know that I know the participants meaning the candidates, don't particularly like it. That's not a reason not to do it, for sure. That may be a reason to do it in some people's minds. But I think that I just think it's too early to tell that it's particularly arduous or difficult or tense after a redistricting when candidates are thrown against. There was a case in California where the two Democratic incumbents, one had been there 30 years, one had been there 15, more or less. and they were thrown against each other in both Democrats in a very Democratic district. Their names were Berman and Sherman, and they were, to make it even better, and they had this 2-year battle against each other. The primary was really only a poll. I mean, the primary, Sherman won the primary by, 6 points, and that probably helped him with fundraising, although he was outspent. But the race went the entire, first the primary, then the general with these two candidates. I don't think I like that much, but I think that it might make sense. I think we need to look at it for a longer period before we do something that dramatically different. I think redistricting is fundamentally the biggest problem here, but I think there are certainly other, I think the bigger problem is just money, the amount of money in campaigns now, and that I remember Mitch McConnell used to say, money should be unlimited, we should, as long as we disclose it. Then when money became unlimited, he fought the whole idea of disclosure. So, it's the kind of money, I know what, I'm not whining, as Connie's book publisher says, no whining on the yacht. You get a job like this, you don't whine about it, but I also know what it's like to have that kind of money that we really didn't know where it came from. It said Chamber of Commerce, it said, what was the one group, over 60s or some group, all these front groups for who knows what. I assume mostly oil money and pharmaceutical money and I don't know, maybe Wall Street money, I don't know where it came from, but it's all so easy to disguise and hide now. And you couple that with redistricting and you get this. It's sort of that plus that equals this, and it doesn't serve us well.
Good afternoon. I'm going to switch the subject a little bit. There's something in Ohio that's being called Chartergate, in which grades on online charter schools, mainly the ones run by David Brennan, were manipulated to make the charter schools present a better picture. And David Hansen, who was the head of the school choice at that time, resigned, and his wife is running Kasich's campaign, and it's really very corrupt. So the state board tried to ask for an outside investigation, and they were outvoted. My question is, would you be willing to lend your voice to an outside investigation of what's been going on in Ohio around charter schools, because it's really, really pathetic?
Thank you, Merle, and I agree with you. The Beacon Journal, the Plain Dealer, and a number of other papers have used the word scandal around for-profit charters. I want to make the really clear distinction here about John Zittner and Breakthrough Schools in Cleveland, and about KIPP in Columbus, and there are a number of others not-for-profit charter schools that really have done very, very good work. I've been in those schools. I've seen the dedication of the teachers, and with the same kind of dedication I've seen in so many other schools. I'm sure they feel the brunt of this criticism because the public conflates for-profit, not-for-profit. Often the stories don't make the distinction well. I just want to make that really clear. I had amendments on the No Child Left Behind bill, as you may know, on charter schools. Ohio is ranked second to the last in the quality of for-profit charters. I think it's measured by a number of things. Some have called Ohio the wild, wild west of for-profit charters. It clearly is bad for taxpayers. Well, first of all, it's bad for those kids that go to those schools, and their parents think they're getting something better than they are, and it's bad for taxpayers. The federal government recently just gave a $71 million grant to Ohio charter schools. We can't get an answer from the Department of Education, Hansen's gone now, Ross, who appointed Hansen, we haven't gotten an answer yet from where in fact this money's going. We've asked in a letter to them that two things. One, we've asked two things. We've asked in a letter that the number of House members signed, Congressman Ryan, Congressman Capter, Congressman Fudge, Congresswoman Beatty. We've had just the four Democrats and Republicans just declined to sign, doing two things. One, to the Department of Education in Washington, did you look at what, did you consider some of the things that were going on with the manipulation of data and all the things that maybe criminal, but certainly unethical activities that went on in the Department of Education on changing data that had been submitted? And did you consider that with the $71 million? And we're then asking that Columbus make sure that money goes to places like Breakthrough and KIPP, not to the for-profits that have in many ways rob taxpayers of what they should be expecting.
Shifting attention to the foreign policies, at the end of your speech you said something about the Iran deal. In your opinion, since you have experience in Russian studies, do you believe that the Iran deal will benefit our relationship with Russia or hurt it?
Very good question. Trying to compete with Shaw there, aren't you? For hard questions. It certainly won't hurt it. I think for some time, our governments were barely speaking. Now there's much more discussion back and forth. I mean, Russia is, if you may remember, and I'll try to make the Iran part of this brief, you may remember during the Iran negotiations, and this is something that Hillary Clinton has gotten very little credit and should get immense credit for this. Our government, the President and Secretary Clinton, knitted together 6 countries, the U.S., France, Germany, Britain, Russia, and China, to enact and to levy and to squeeze and tighten sanctions against Iran. Not so hard with France and Germany and Britain. Not easy either sometimes, but not so hard. Really hard with China and Russia. So not only did they enact the sanctions, did they levy the sanctions, but they've kept them in place through the entire negotiations with Iran. That's why we got, I think, a pretty good Iran nuclear deal, is because we held all 6 countries together. Just the fact that Russia was at the table, and Lavrov and Kerry and, well, Hillary before that, but in our countries were working together on this, that improves relations. The second thing that potentially improves relations with a rocky relationship we have within that context is what we are doing jointly with ISIS. While Russia clearly is doing things in Syria that we find repugnant, they are with us on going after ISIS. So as Russia feared Iran getting nuclear weapon, Russia fears what ISIS. So when our interests coincide, it's a good thing. We work together. The more we can do that, the more we can talk with them to break down problems when we look at things very differently.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have very much enjoyed a forum featuring United States Senator Sherrod Brown. Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.